Sarah Mitchell stood at the entrance of Blue Sky Private Airport on a bright Tuesday morning. Her dark curls were neatly tied back, and she wore comfortable designer jeans with a simple white blouse. At 35, she had built Mitchell Aviation from the ground up, turning it into one of the most successful private jet companies in the country. The morning sun reflected off the large glass windows of the terminal as Sarah checked her phone one last time. Her flight to Miami was scheduled for 10:30 a.m., giving her plenty of time to go through the usual procedures. After a hectic week filled with back-to-back meetings and contract signings, she was looking forward to a weekend of relaxation at her beach house. As she walked through the parking lot, Sarah noticed how different the private terminal looked compared to when she first started her business 7 years ago. Back then, she was just a young entrepreneur with big dreams and a solid business plan. Now, her company owned 12 luxury private jets, serving some of the most elite clients in the country. Sarah grabbed her small carry-on bag from the trunk of her Tesla. She had packed light. Just a few swimsuits, some casual wear, and one formal outfit for a dinner meeting she couldn't avoid even on her weekend off. The wheels of her suitcase made a soft sound against the smooth pavement as she walked toward the terminal entrance. Inside, the terminal was quiet and elegant, with soft classical music playing in the background. The marble floors gleamed under the crystal chandeliers, and comfortable leather chairs were arranged in small groups throughout the waiting area. This was the world Sarah had worked so hard to be part of, and now she owned a significant piece of it. A few other passengers sat in the waiting area, a businessman typing furiously on his laptop, an elderly couple reading magazines, and a young family with two well-behaved children. Sarah smiled politely at them as she walked past, heading toward the security checkpoint that led to the tarmac where her jet was waiting. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her identification cards and ownership papers, a routine she had performed hundreds of times before. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the terminal's small but exclusive cafe, reminding her that she hadn't had breakfast yet. Sarah made a mental note to ask Jenny, her flight attendant, to prepare her favorite morning smoothie once they were in the air. Looking through the large windows, Sarah could see her jet, a beautiful Gulfstream G650, one of the newest additions to her fleet. Its pristine white exterior gleamed in the morning sun, with the Mitchell Aviation logo, a stylized golden wing, clearly visible on the tail. The sight still filled her with pride every time she saw it. As she approached the security checkpoint, Sarah noticed a new guard she hadn't seen before. He was a tall man in his 50s, with graying hair and a stern expression that seemed permanently etched on his face. His name tag read James Richardson, and he was watching the approaching passengers with an intensity that seemed unnecessary for the quiet morning hour. Sarah pulled her ID card holder from her bag, ready to present her credentials as usual. She had done this countless times, and while some guards were more formal than others, the process was typically smooth and professional. After all, most of the regular staff knew her by name. The morning air conditioning made the terminal slightly chilly, and Sarah wished she had brought her light jacket from the car. She could see the ground crew preparing her jet through the window, going through their pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. In less than an hour, she would be in the air, heading toward the warm Miami sunshine. Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. "Have a great weekend, Ms. Mitchell. Weather in Miami looks perfect." She smiled at the message, already imagining herself relaxing by her pool with a good book. After the stress of the past week, she needed this break. Little did Sarah know that in the next few minutes, her routine morning at the airport would turn into something completely unexpected. As she stepped up to the security checkpoint, James Richardson's eyes narrowed, and his posture stiffened. The peaceful morning was about to become a lesson in prejudice, power, and the importance of breaking down stereotypes in the modern world. James Richardson stood at his post, scanning Sarah's ID with a suspicious look that made her feel instantly uncomfortable. Despite her credentials being clearly displayed, he held up his hand to stop her from proceeding toward the tarmac. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a tone that was far from professional. "I think you might be confused. The commercial terminal is on the other side of the airport." He gestured vaguely toward the direction of the main airport building, not even bothering to look at the ID in his hand. Sarah took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. She had faced the terminal's atmosphere grew more tense as several airport employees began gathering around the security checkpoint. Among them was Maria Rodriguez, a longtime front desk employee who had just arrived for her shift. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. "Oh my goodness, Ms. Mitchell," Maria called out, hurrying toward them. "Is everything okay?" She looked confused by the sight of her boss being blocked from entering the tarmac area. Richardson's stern expression flickered for just a moment, but he held his ground. "You know this person?" he asked Maria, still keeping his arm extended to block Sarah's path. "Of course I know her," Maria replied, clearly shocked. "This is Ms. Sarah Mitchell. She owns Mitchell Aviation and half of the private jets in our hangars. I've worked with her for 5 years." More people were gathering now. 2 pilots from another company stopped to watch, and a maintenance crew paused their work to observe the unfolding situation. Sarah noticed that several phones were now recording the incident, and she could only imagine how quickly this would spread through social media. Richardson's face had turned a deeper shade of red, but instead of backing down, he doubled down on his position. "Look," he said, his voice getting louder, "I've been instructed to maintain strict security protocols. Anyone could claim to be an owner. Until my supervisor arrives, nobody is getting through." Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed with multiple incoming messages. Her executive team, who were supposed to meet her at the jet, were wondering why she hadn't arrived at the tarmac. She typed a quick message explaining the situation. "Mr. Richardson," Sarah said calmly, "in the next few minutes, my entire executive team will be here. They're already in the building. Would you like to rethink your position before they arrive?" The guard shifted his weight uncomfortably, but maintained his stern expression. "Protocols are protocols, ma'am. I don't care who's coming. Security can't be compromised based on claims and confusion." More employees had gathered, forming a semicircle around the checkpoint. Many of them knew Sarah well, and their faces showed a mix of embarrassment and anger at how she was being treated. The young family from earlier had moved closer, the parents using this moment to whisper what seemed to be an important lesson to their children. Sarah heard familiar footsteps approaching from behind. "What's the holdup here?" A deep voice called out. It was Marcus Thompson, her chief operations officer, a tall man in his 40s wearing a crisp blue suit. Behind him were 3 other executive team members, all looking concerned and confused. "Sarah, is everything okay?" Marcus asked, then noticed Richardson's blocking position. His expression darkened as he quickly understood the situation. Richardson looked from Marcus to Sarah, then back again. The crowd had grown larger, and whispers filled the terminal. Some people were shaking their heads in disbelief, while others were openly expressing their disapproval of the guard's behavior. "Sir," Marcus addressed Richardson directly, his voice firm but controlled, "you're currently preventing the CEO and owner of Mitchell Aviation from accessing her own aircraft. Would you care to explain why?" The radio on Richardson's belt crackled again. "Richardson, what's the status of that situation?" Bob's voice came through clearly. Before Richardson could respond, Sarah gently took the radio from his belt. "Bob, this is Sarah Mitchell. Could you please come to the main checkpoint? We have a situation that needs your immediate attention." There was a pause, then Bob's surprised voice responded, "Ms. Mitchell? I'll be right there." Richardson's face had lost all its color. The realization of his mistake was finally starting to sink in, but pride kept him from admitting it. He stood frozen, his arm still partially extended, though it had dropped considerably from its original blocking position. Sarah looked around at the gathered crowd, at the phones recording the incident, at her supportive staff, and at the guard who had let his prejudices cloud his judgment. This moment, she decided, would not be wasted. It would become a catalyst for change. The sound of rapid footsteps announced Bob's arrival. As he rushed toward the checkpoint, Sarah knew that the next few minutes would determine not just how this situation would be resolved, but how similar situations would be handled in the future at Blue Sky Private Airport. Bob Thompson, the head of airport security, rushed through the terminal, his face showing concern as he took in the scene before him. The crowd parted to let him through, and the whispers momentarily died down as everyone waited to see what would happen next. "Ms. Mitchell," Bob said, slightly out of breath, "I am so sorry about this. I had no idea you were the person Richardson was referring to." He turned to face the guard, who was still standing stiffly at his post, though his blocking arm had finally dropped completely to his side. Sarah maintained her composure, though the faces of support around her made her eyes slightly misty. This wasn't the first time she had faced discrimination, but it was perhaps the most public incident in her professional life. "Bob," she said calmly, "I think we need to have a serious discussion about the security protocols and training at this airport." Her voice carried through the quiet terminal, clear and professional. "But first, I believe Mr. Richardson owes me an explanation." The gathered crowd had grown even larger. Airport staff from various departments had heard about the incident and come to witness it. Among them was Jenny, Sarah's regular flight attendant, who looked both angry and heartbroken at how her boss had been treated. Richardson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I was just following security protocols," he mumbled, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "We have to be careful about unauthorized access." "And what exactly made you think I was unauthorized?" Sarah asked, her voice firm but controlled. "Was it my valid ID? The fact that my name is on the building? Or was it something else entirely, Mr. Richardson?" The terminal fell completely silent. Even the young children who had been whispering earlier seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. The businessman who had been working on his laptop now stood with the crowd, his phone among the many recording the confrontation. Marcus, Sarah's COO, stepped forward. "As an African-American executive who has worked in this industry for 20 years, he said, addressing both Bob and Richardson, "I've seen this kind of security concern far too often. It needs to stop." Sarah noticed tears in the eyes of some of her staff members. Maria, the front desk employee, was wiping her eyes discreetly. Even some of the passengers who had just been bystanders seemed emotionally affected by the scene. Bob turned to Richardson, his face stern. "James, this is completely unacceptable. Ms. Mitchell is not only one of our most respected clients but also owns a significant portion of the aircraft that operate from this terminal. Your behavior today reflects poorly on all of us." Richardson's face had turned from red to pale, then back to red again. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. I apologize," he stammered, but Sarah held up her hand to stop him. "An apology isn't enough," she said, looking not just at Richardson, but at everyone gathered around. "What happened here today isn't just about me. It's about every person who has faced similar discrimination but didn't have the position or power to challenge it." The morning sun streaming through the terminal's windows had grown stronger, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Sarah's phone buzzed again, her pilot asking if everything was all right. She quickly messaged back that she would be slightly delayed. "Bob," Sarah continued, "I want to schedule a meeting with airport management for tomorrow morning. This incident has shown that we need immediate changes in how security personnel are trained and how protocols are implemented." Bob nodded quickly. "Of course, Ms. Mitchell. I'll arrange it right away." Richardson stood silently, his earlier arrogance replaced by evident shame. The crowd continued to watch, many still recording, as this moment of discrimination transformed into an opportunity for change. Sarah looked at her watch. Her flight to Miami was now delayed, but she didn't mind. Some things were more important than a weekend getaway. She turned to address the crowd directly, knowing that what she would say next would set the tone for the changes to come at Blue Sky Private Airport. The terminal remained silent, everyone waiting to hear her next words. In this moment, Sarah wasn't just a CEO defending her right to access her own jet. She was becoming a voice for change in an industry that desperately needed it. Sarah looked at the gathered crowd, knowing her next words would be shared far beyond the walls of this terminal. She straightened her shoulders and spoke with quiet authority that commanded everyone's attention. "Today's incident is unfortunate, but it presents an opportunity," she began. "An opportunity to address the biases that still exist in our industry and to make real changes." Her voice carried clearly through the hushed terminal. Just then, David Chen, Sarah's chief legal officer, hurried through the entrance. He had been alerted by several text messages from staff members about the situation. His presence added another layer of seriousness to the scene, and Richardson seemed to shrink even further into himself. "Ms. Mitchell," David said, tablet in hand, "I've already started drafting a formal complaint about this incident. Would you like me to proceed?" His question hung in the air as everyone waited for Sarah's response. Sarah studied Richardson's face for a moment. The guard was now looking at the floor, his earlier confidence completely vanished. She could see the sweat on his forehead and the slight trembling of his hands. No, David, she finally replied. I have a different approach in mind. She turned to address Bob directly. Instead of filing complaints or taking punitive actions, I want to use this moment to create positive change. The tension in the terminal shifted slightly. People exchanged curious glances, wondering what Sarah had in mind. Even Richardson looked up, surprise evident on his face. Here's what I propose, Sarah continued. First, we will implement comprehensive bias training for all security personnel, not just here, but at all airports where Mitchell Aviation operates. Second, we will establish a review board to examine and update security protocols to ensure they're both effective and equitable. Bob nodded enthusiastically, clearly relieved that Sarah was taking a constructive approach rather than a punitive one. We would welcome your input on these changes, Ms. Mitchell, he said. Sarah then turned to Richardson, who seemed unsure whether to maintain his security stance or shrink away entirely. Mr. Richardson, you have a choice to make, she said firmly but not unkindly. You can either be part of the problem or part of the solution. Which will it be? The guard swallowed hard before speaking. I would like to be part of the solution, he said quietly. I never meant to. I didn't realize. He struggled to find the right words. Actions speak louder than words, Sarah replied. If you're serious about making changes, you can start by participating in the development of our new training program. Your experience to date could help prevent similar incidents in the future. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Several people were nodding in agreement, and some were still recording the interaction on their phones. Sarah knew this moment would likely go viral on social media, but she wanted it to be remembered for the right reasons. Marcus stepped forward again. Sarah, your Miami meeting can be rescheduled if needed. This is more important. She shook her head. No, we'll proceed with both. I'll take my scheduled flight to Miami, and when I return on Monday, we'll begin implementing these changes. She turned to Bob. I expect a preliminary meeting with your management team first thing Monday morning. Of course, Ms. Mitchell, Bob agreed quickly. I'll have a complete proposal ready for your review. The young family that had been watching the entire scene approached Sarah. The mother, holding her daughter's hand, spoke up. Thank you for handling this the way you did. You've shown our children how to respond to prejudice with grace and wisdom. Sarah smiled warmly at the children. Sometimes the best response to ignorance is education, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And the best response to prejudice is progress. She turned back to Richardson, who still stood at his post but now with a very different demeanor. Mr. Richardson, I expect to see you at Monday's meeting. Your perspective will be valuable in understanding how to better train security personnel. As the crowd began to disperse and Sarah finally prepared to head toward her jet, she knew that what had started as an ugly incident was transforming into something positive. The next few days would be busy, not just with her Miami business, but with planning the changes that would prevent future incidents like this. The morning sun now filled the terminal completely, and Sarah couldn't help but feel that it was symbolic of the light being shed on a dark corner of their industry, one that was finally ready for change. The Monday morning meeting at Blue Sky Private Airport had a different energy than usual. The large conference room was filled with airport management, security personnel, and several members of Mitchell Aviation's executive team. Sarah sat at the head of the table, her presence commanding attention even in silence. Bob had prepared extensively over the weekend, and thick folders of proposed changes lay in front of each person. Richardson sat near the back of the room, looking uncomfortable in his business casual attire rather than his usual security uniform. Let's begin, Sarah said, opening her folder. I've reviewed the current security protocols, and while they're thorough, they need significant updates. She glanced around the room, meeting each person's eyes. What happened on Friday isn't just about one incident or one person. It's about systemic issues that need addressing. The room was silent as Sarah stood and walked to the whiteboard. She picked up a marker and wrote, respect, recognition, reform, in clear letters. These are our 3 priorities moving forward, she explained. Linda Martinez, the airport's HR director, raised her hand. Ms. Mitchell, we've already received dozens of messages from other airports asking about our planned changes. Your handling of Friday's incident has gone viral on social media. Sarah nodded, having expected this. The videos taken by witnesses had indeed spread quickly across various platforms. Some showed the confrontation, while others captured her measured response and call for change. Hashtag Mitchell Aviation and hashtag Changjin Aviation had been trending all weekend. Good, Sarah replied. That means we have an opportunity to set an example for the entire industry. She turned to Richardson, who seemed to want to disappear into his chair. Mr. Richardson, would you please share your thoughts about what happened? The room grew tenser as Richardson slowly stood up. His face was flushed, but his voice was steady. I spent the weekend thinking about my actions, he began. I realized that I let unconscious biases affect my judgment. I saw what I expected to see, not what was actually in front of me. Several heads nodded around the room. Sarah noticed some security officers exchanging knowing looks. This was clearly not the first time such biases had influenced decisions, even if previous incidents had gone unreported. Thank you for your honesty, Sarah said. Now, let's look at the specific changes we're going to implement. She flipped to page 3 of the proposal. First, all security personnel will undergo monthly diversity and bias awareness training. This isn't just about race. It's about challenging all our preconceptions. Bob stepped forward with his laptop, pulling up a presentation on the room's large screen. We've already contacted several leading diversity training firms, he explained. They're eager to work with us on developing a comprehensive program. The meeting continued for 3 hours, with detailed discussions about new protocols, training programs, and accountability measures. Sarah noticed that Richardson, despite his initial discomfort, was actively participating, offering insights about situations security officers face daily. One more thing, Sarah said as the meeting was wrapping up. I want to establish a monthly forum where security personnel can discuss challenging situations they've encountered. We learn best from sharing experiences. Marcus, who had been taking detailed notes, spoke up. We should also create an anonymous reporting system for passengers who feel they've been unfairly treated. This will help us track and address issues more effectively. The energy in the room was now noticeably different from the start of the meeting. What had begun as a response to an unfortunate incident was transforming into a meaningful movement for change. As people began gathering their materials, Richardson approached Sarah. Miss Mitchell, he said quietly, I want you to know that I'm truly committed to making these changes work. What happened on Friday, it opened my eyes. Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. Mr. Richardson, sometimes our mistakes, painful as they are, can lead to the greatest improvements. Use this experience to help others learn and grow. As the room cleared out, Sarah remained at the table, looking at her notes. The incident that could have ended in anger and legal action was instead becoming a catalyst for industry-wide change. Her phone buzzed with messages from other aviation companies asking about implementing similar training programs. Outside the conference room windows, she could see planes taking off and landing, carrying people from all walks of life. Soon, she hoped, every one of them would be treated with the same respect and dignity they deserved, regardless of their appearance or background. The real work was just beginning, but Sarah felt confident that Blue Sky Private Airport would set a new standard for the aviation industry. Sometimes, she reflected, the most significant changes come from the most unexpected moments. 6 months had passed since the incident at Blue Sky Private Airport, and the changes were evident to everyone. The terminal had a different atmosphere now, more welcoming, more professional, and notably more diverse in its staff. Sarah stood at the same security checkpoint where everything had started, but this time she was watching Richardson conduct a training session for new security officers. His voice carried clearly through the terminal as he spoke about the importance of respectful screening procedures. Remember, Richardson said to the group of trainees, our job is to ensure safety while treating every person with dignity and respect. Assumptions and biases have no place in professional security work. The new officers nodded, taking notes on their tablets. The training program that had emerged from the incident had become known as the Mitchell Standard in the aviation industry. Over 20 other private airports had already adopted similar programs, with Sarah's team helping to implement them. Maria, still working at the front desk, approached Sarah with a smile. Ms. Mitchell, the latest satisfaction surveys are in, she said, handing over a tablet. Our ratings have increased by 40% since implementing the new protocols. Sarah scrolled through the data, noting the positive comments from passengers of all backgrounds. The changes weren't just about preventing discrimination, they had improved the overall airport experience for everyone. Just then, Marcus arrived with more good news. Sarah, the Aviation Industry Council wants you to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference, he announced. They're specifically interested in how we transformed an incident of discrimination into a model for positive change. The young family that had witnessed the original incident now regularly flew through Blue Sky Airport. Today, they were passing through again, and the mother stopped to chat with Sarah. My children still talk about what they learned that day, she said. You showed them how to stand up for what's right while creating positive change. Richardson, finishing his training session, walked over to join them. He was different now, more confident in a new way, not from authority but from understanding. He had become one of the most vocal advocates for the new training program. Ms. Mitchell, he said, we just completed our 100th training session. The feedback from security teams has been incredible. People are finally feeling comfortable discussing these issues openly. Sarah nodded approvingly. The past 6 months have been busy, but the results were worth every moment of effort. The security team now reflected the diversity of their passengers, and incidents of bias had dropped to nearly zero. A group of aviation executives was touring the facility today, interested in implementing similar changes at their airports. They watched as Richardson demonstrated the new screening procedures, which were both thorough and respectful. The key, Richardson explained to the visiting executives, is understanding that security and respect are not mutually exclusive. We can maintain high security standards while treating everyone with dignity. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her PR team. Another major news outlet wanted to cover the success of the Mitchell Standard. The story had resonated far beyond the aviation industry, inspiring similar changes in other sectors. Looking around the terminal, Sarah could see the physical changes too. New signs in multiple languages welcomed visitors, and the security desk now had a clear display of passengers' rights and the airport's commitment to fair treatment. The elderly couple who had witnessed the original incident was there again, preparing for their monthly flight. The husband stopped to speak with Sarah. We've been flying through private airports for 30 years, he said, and we've never seen such positive changes in such a short time. As Sarah walked through the terminal, she noticed small but significant differences. Security officers greeted everyone with the same professional courtesy. Passengers from all backgrounds moved through checkpoints without tension. The atmosphere was one of mutual respect and understanding. Marcus joined her by the window overlooking the tarmac. You know, he said, what happened that day could have ended very differently. Most people would have filed lawsuits or demanded firings. Sarah watched as a diverse group of passengers boarded their jets. Sometimes, she replied, the best way to fight discrimination is to transform it into education. We didn't just change policies, we changed mindsets. The afternoon sun streamed through the terminal's windows, illuminating the space where 6 months ago an incident of bias had become a catalyst for change. In the distance, a Mitchell aviation jet took off, carrying with it the promise of an industry transformed by one woman's choice to turn adversity into opportunity. 1 year after the incident, Blue Sky Private Airport hosted a special ceremony. The terminal was filled with aviation industry leaders, security personnel, and media representatives from across the country. A new sign was being unveiled, the Mitchell Center for Aviation Excellence. Sarah stood at the podium, looking out at the gathered crowd. Richardson sat in the front row, now wearing a badge that identified him as the head of diversity and security training. Next to him were several security officers who had graduated from the program he helped create. 1 year ago, Sarah began her speech. An incident in this very terminal could have ended in anger and division. Instead, it became the beginning of a transformation that has reached far beyond these walls. Her voice carried through the hushed room. The young family from that first day was present again, this time as special guests. Their children, now a year older, wore small pins that read Future Aviation Leaders. The mother had become an active member of the airport's Community Advisory Board. Today, Sarah continued, over 100 private airports across the country have adopted the Mitchell Standard. But more importantly, we've created a culture where every person, regardless of their appearance or background, is treated with dignity and respect. Statistics displayed on large screens showed the impact of their changes. Discrimination complaints had dropped to zero across participating airports. Customer satisfaction had reached record highs, and employee retention had improved significantly. Bob, still head of airport security, but now with a national reputation for innovative leadership, stepped forward to present Sarah with an award from the Aviation Security Association. Ms. Mitchell showed us that true security comes not just from protocols, but from understanding and respect, he said. Richardson's transformation had perhaps been the most remarkable. He had traveled to dozens of airports, sharing his story and helping implement new training programs. His honest acknowledgement of his past biases and his commitment to change had made him a powerful advocate for reform. The hardest part about change, Richardson said when it was his turn to speak, is admitting that you need to change. What happened that day forced me to confront my own biases, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to help others do the same. Maria, now the Director of Customer Relations, presented data showing how the airport's reputation had soared. Private jet owners specifically requested Blue Sky Airport for their flights, citing its professional and inclusive atmosphere. The elderly couple who had witnessed the original incident had become regular speakers at training sessions, sharing their perspective on how the aviation industry had evolved over the decades. They sat proudly in the audience, wearing badges that identified them as aviation community ambassadors. As the ceremony continued, Sarah announced the launch of a scholarship program for minority students interested in aviation careers. Change isn't just about fixing problems, she explained. It's about creating new opportunities for the future. Marcus, still serving as COO, revealed that Mitchell Aviation had doubled in size over the past year. Their commitment to inclusive practices had attracted new clients and partners who shared their values. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a plaque that would hang in the terminal. It read, "Where dignity takes flight," dedicated to ensuring that every person who passes through these doors is treated with respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from. After the formal proceedings, Sarah walked through the terminal, observing the daily operations that have become a model for airports nationwide. Security officers greeted passengers with professional courtesy, making eye contact and offering assistance when needed. The businessman who had recorded the original incident on his phone now used Blue Sky Airport exclusively for his corporate flights. "You didn't just change an airport," he told Sarah. "You changed an entire industry's mindset." As the sun set on this milestone day, Sarah stood by the same window where she had waited for her delayed flight a year ago. She watched planes take off and land, carrying people from all walks of life, each treated with the same level of respect and professionalism. A new group of security trainees walked past, led by Richardson. They stopped to thank Sarah, and she could see in their eyes the same commitment to fairness and dignity that had driven the changes over the past year. The Mitchell Center for Aviation Excellence would stand as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful changes come not from confrontation, but from the willingness to transform a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for growth and understanding. As Sarah watched the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant colors, she knew that this was just the beginning of a lasting change in aviation history.